afternoon and welcome to Zion's Banner. Now this is a little different broadcast. It's going to be set up as a premiere. I'm actually broadcasting from the computer room of my son as we are quarantining together in Vermont so that I can speak at some Vermont churches. And so these are not ideal conditions. We're day 3 into our quarantine. So if I was going to talk about day 3 of our quarantine log, around us is a beautiful hill and lots of snow. And so I'm going to be recording this and doing this different and joining you online to look at the chat as much as is possible on that day. Now there's an hour difference, 2 hours difference roughly between here and Arizona. In fact, I'm checking my computer calendar right now and checking it out. Not computer calendar, but it is 2 hours. And so my normal broadcast time will be 6 o'clock Arizona time, but it'll be 8 o'clock here. Probably will be on about an hour. We have a wonderful little granddaughter, but her sleep schedule has already been off, and so we're going to be working to help the new parents to be able to get the rest they need by taking the rest we need. We're going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be pulling from my So New, What About Messiah for this Wednesday night instead of the usual apologetics broadcast. And really for the next few nights, there'll be messages and things that I've done in the past in various locations instead of the normal apologetics broadcast. You may say, why am I doing this? Because the high speed here is such that some of the preparation that I would normally do in an apologetics broadcast is going to be extremely difficult. Not to mention the fact that, yes, there is some church speaking that I'm going to be doing that's terribly important to us as missionaries. And really an important part of our ministry as missionaries is to bring a blessing and the word to those churches that support us or are interested in us or even interested in the topic. In case you're wondering what the topic is, I'm going to be doing Messiah in the Passover presentations. And then at one church, I'm going to be preaching a message, and I'm considering one on divine hiddenness and the book of Esther. If I do indeed do that one, and it is recorded, I will probably be allowing you, my audience, to go ahead and see that. Now, I have been able to set up the PowerPoint window, so let's get started here. Again, I'm kind of working from 2 windows here, so if I turn my head briefly, I just got to switch. The first question that we need to ask is what makes something Messianic prophecy? And that window should be showing right now, and it's not. So, yeah, I get very uncomfortable when glitches happen, but I'm going to just go ahead and change the PowerPoint window. OBS does not allow for 2 monitors, which is a disappointment to me. And this is kind of an odd thing. It is just a joy to be doing this and have things glitchify. And I'm not quite sure why. The automatic suggestion is doing that. So I'm just going here to see if that helps us a little bit. I'm going to switch to the no more PowerPoint window, and we're just going to kind of lump it here. And see what we can do. Okay. And I'm going to bring that window up, and we're going to just go ahead and do it. There we go. And I'm going to switch the slideshow formatting, and we'll just go ahead and we'll we'll do things a little differently. I mean, every so often we got to kind of do that, switch things up a little bit, and at times like that, you just kind of go with it. There we go, and I'm going to go ahead and switch that out, and we'll just do it differently. There are those sorts of things that you just make do with. There we go, and we'll do it this way. It's not quite the way I'd like to do it, but it should let me switch things out a little better and with a little less trouble. And so that's the way we'll do things. And we'll bring that up and switch that out. And there we go. Now we can get some stuff done here. Should work okay because we really want these questions in here. There we go. Sorry about the little glitch there. I'm reacquainting myself with OBS the hard way. We have Sarah, and she's going to ask the question, what makes things Messianic prophecy? So welcome to the world of COVID Safe House, some undisclosed location at about 2:30 our time. We need to look at these ground rules and see what they are. Now, this is so important. Stick around for this just again because of review. Understand that your Bible doesn't say in the original text, hi, this is Messianic prophecy. And so it's terribly important that we understand the rules here. First of all, prophets always saw things epotalismatically. Hey, there's your word for today. You could say that today's show is brought to you by the word epotalismatic, which means like in Vermont, they saw things from hilltop to hilltop, but not the valleys in between. What God was interested in giving people, particularly the children of Israel, were the major events that they needed to know about, not all the details. By the way, again, proof that our Bible was never designed to be a systematic theology book. It was never designed to be that. We have the big story, and then what you're getting is you're getting snapshots. Think of like a photographic slideshow. You don't know what comes between the photographs and the slideshow. And so that's the first thing we need to understand, that it's epotalismatic. It's as if you stood on a mountaintop. Now, Michael Brown points this out. The other thing you need to understand is they always viewed the coming of Messiah as imminent. Now, that's terribly important because that's the way New Testament future prophecy works too. The coming of the Lord is imminent. They always saw it as coming. Now, that's why Paul could talk about Christ coming back as if it was in his day, because he's seeing it as imminent. And so that's a terribly important thing to understand. The time lags that we understand or see aren't something that they had to deal with. It also grew gradually. In other words, you don't get a full and complete picture of Messiah all at once. It's like a jigsaw puzzle in which you're getting pieces. And it's only when you have all the pieces that the picture becomes really clear. And so Sarah is asking with her cup of coffee, which by the way is flowing freely here, and I'm terribly grateful for it. Why in the world would this hope develop gradually? And so she's asking a really good question here. And so as I look at her question, why do you think God would end up doing that? Why wouldn't he give Israel the complete picture? Well, you have to understand that God is giving hope to his people through promise. In fact, that's a real good principle for us. How does God encourage his people? Through promise. As Israel experienced difficulties and problems, they were more anxious to look for this messianic hope. Now, it was there and it was something to look for, but they were looking for it more intently during times of trouble. And as each of the things occurred in their joint corporate history, which Jews carry very much with them. Okay, when I ever do a Passover Seder, it's the rabbi said you should view it as if you yourself were leaving Egypt. And I've said this before, as they ran into these things, God would give them hope through promise, and he'd give them more information about Messiah as he did so. So understand, as you're reading your Bible, it is not an all for one picture with this text. And this is where we get in trouble as Christians when we try to prove text, because the picture of Messiah is cumulative, and we often try to take isolated pieces in order to prove something, but the pieces actually work together pretty closely. And so that's why, Sarah, that's the case. Okay? What are some things we can use to know? Because she wants to know what's Messianic prophecy and what's not. One is intertextuality. Okay, is this Messianic according to the biblical narrative? And I want you guys to think narrative. It's sort of what we're all about. What is the biblical narrative here? And so, does the biblical narrative support that this is Messianic prophecy? Are there other places in which this picture or this theme or something that indicates that this is Messianic prophecy appears? Now, Jim Sibley quotes the work called The Torah is Good. By the way, this is a section out of the Jim Sibley's quoting is quoted in Moody's Handbook to Messianic Prophecy. It is an incredible book. He's quoting an earlier work by Seth D. Postel. I knew someone who knew Seth Postel before he was a PhD when he was growing up. Eitan Ben Ezra, I'm having a little trouble here, but Bar Eretz, Eitan Bar and Eretz Sarof in something called Is the Torah Good? It was done by One for Israel. And so this quote is terribly important, since it has already been made clear that Moses would prefigure God's ultimate answer to the sin of humankind through his role as deliverer, through supernatural signs, and through intimate relationship with God. To fail to recognize the messianic character of Deuteronomy 18:15 through 19 is thus to miss the point of the whole Torah. And so they're just saying the whole of the biblical narrative supports this. Okay? The final way to look at that is, did Jews understand this as being messianic? This is terribly important. Okay, Romans 3:1 through 3 states that to them, Israel was entrusted the oracles of God. By the way, again, in Corinthians, we're told that the church is the steward, or was entrusted with the mysteries of God. Did the Jewish people, through piecing the puzzle together, believe that this was messianic prophecy? Did they ever conclude this prophecy was messianic, particularly before the completion of the Talmud? Because that would give this an early date. Now, there's a little more to this than that. There's a tendency to deny messianic value to this verse as a reaction against early Jewish Christian claims. Guys like Tovia Singer, who didn't like the newly emerging sect within Judaism of the Christians. They were sometimes known as followers of the way. Paul says this in Acts, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of my forefathers. And so as the gospel spreads among the Jewish people, there's backlash. Okay? And this reminds us that polemics plays a role. Even though the Jewish people, this is a good test. Did they consider it messianic? We do have to temper that test with the knowledge that sometimes there'll be a resistance to the messianic nature of the text. Now you might be saying, well, how do we deal with that? Was there any recognition of this text? When did that recognition occur? And, was that recognition in contrast to the polemic or the tendency to pull away from this as a messianic prophecy. There is ancient midrash, which is old source. Now remember, the midrash is the earlier part of the Talmud. We put that at, well, see, it depends on the part, but early midrash we can say is close enough to the time of the Second Temple period that there's reason to pay some attention to. This is early midrash on Kohelet Rabbah. As the first Redeemer was, so the last Redeemer will be. And that's out of the Handbook on Messianic Prophecy by Michael Rodelnik and Edward Bloom. Now, that means that we have some sources that are earlier that would indicate that this was Messianic prophecy. It was regarded so. Now, we have sources that will disagree with that on a polemic consideration, but we do have an early source. And by the way, this is interesting because depending on where you put this midrash, okay, if you even put it later, let's say in the 100s or 200s, Christianity has grown and the polemic should normally be there, and this writing is not refuted, corrected, in any way. And so that becomes terribly interesting. A later audience, now this is interesting because now you have the polemic against this verse in reaction to Christianity, but then you have those rabbis who look at the text and they want to be honest with the text, and they actually go against the rabbinical sources that want to downplay this text and say, well, it's definitely messianic. And we have a source in Levi ben Gershon in the 1200s, and you have roughly what looks to be about 1288 to 1344. And he commenting on Deuteronomy 34:10, and you can see that quote there, and he links it to 1815, and has, as he is King Messiah, he will be the one about whom the prophet said, he will delight in the fear of the Lord. Now that's out of Isaiah 11, I believe. Not by what his eyes see will he judge, or by the hearing of his ears will it be reviewed. Isaiah 11, see, that's the verses in there. 3, also see Sanhedrin 93. And this quote's a little skewed. By signs and wonders, Hashem will change the language of the nations to a clear language, to call everyone in the name of the Lord to worship him with one intent, referring to Zephaniah 3:9, which there will be one pure language, and they will call upon the Lord, and the Lord will be, his name will be one. Hashem took Israel to be raised up to his worship by tremendous amount of signs and wonders, which he will show them in Egypt, and showed them in Egypt, at the sea, and in the desert. Now, what's significant too is that Messiah is being connected not only with Israel but with the nations in this verse. I put this in the early church leaders in Acts when this verse is referenced. This is Moses who said to the children of Israel, the Lord your God will raise up a prophet like me from your brother, and him you shall hear. Now, rabbinical authorities like Tovia would say, that's a Christian writing. Now, see, I take real issue with that. Yes, it is a writing of the Christians, but you see, what Tovia continually ignores, and many others do, is that this is Jewish literature. The first believers were a sect of Judaism speaking to Jews. This audience is speaking to Jewish men. If this prophecy was in dispute when it was used, there would have been an immediate response by the crowds. And the person who uses this with Israel is certainly not going to use a verse that he believes has no basis for being used this way with a Jewish audience. And so this is Jewish literature, and when you compare that with Deuteronomy 18:15, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren, him you shall hear, then you see direct use by the apostles. Okay? Uh, we also base it on the context. Now, the context of the verse, and then the context beyond that verse, in terms of the what the verse is saying itself, and so that's terribly important. And I want to move this up a little bit here so you can see Sarah and her cup of coffee just a little better. Let's understand the Hebrew narrative. What's the concern in Deuteronomy? Now, these are the last messages of Moses before they enter the promised land. And the concern is who's going to teach us now? Moses is Moses Rabbeinu. Understand the significance of Abraham, Moses, David to the Jewish people. Abraham is Avinu, Abraham our father. He's the patriarch of the people. He is the progenitor, in a sense, of the entire Jewish people. He is the father of the fathers. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Now, when we get to Moses, Moses is Moses Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. He's the one that brought us the instruction of God. He led us. He was the voice of God to us. And so in this section, the real concern is that Moses will be passing off the scene. Now remember, Moses is told he will not be entering the promised land. We're in the second repetition of the law. It's being kind of reiterated with emphasis on parts to prepare the people for going to the land. Moses knows that it's almost over. The children of Israel are very concerned about this. And so that's kind of the concern is, how will they be able to discern in terms of future false prophets? And you know what? There's a double entente. It should be false spelled differently, but you know what? False prophets are prophets that cause faults. And so there's the danger of them being misled. So pardon a little homonymal punning, I guess, going on here. The Parsha is a Parsha known as, it has to do with judgment and justice. So for a team. And so the first part deals with the administration of civil law and the necessity for civil law or justice to be preserved in the community after Moses. And then it extends into a discussion of who will instruct for God to the people after Moses. Who will instruct the people from God after Moses? Who will be that voice, that teacher after Moses passes off the scene? And so that's kind of the construction there. Now, there are going to be some issues with this passage, and occasionally I look away just to kind of see where I am in the slides. But while the Hebrew noun here is singular, a singular noun can sometimes be used in a collective sense. So are we talking about a line of prophets only? Are we talking about a line of prophets that culminates in one individual who'll be the ultimate prophet? Are we talking about just one individual alone? And because the Hebrew noun, when it's singular, can be used collectively. Let me give you an example, seed. Okay, all the children of Israel are seed of Abraham. When we talk about Abraham's seed, we're not necessarily referring to just one individual, but we can be speaking collectively. And that leads us to different views as far as this passage. Now, there's a view that this isn't Messianic at all. And I'm not even going to entertain that view. Because we've seen an early Midrash that says it is. We've seen even later rabbinical opinion, which we shouldn't find if there was a continuing sense that the passage could not refer to Messiah. And so I'm not even going to deal with the non-Messianic view. I'm going to deal with the indirect Messianic view and the direct Messianic view. Now, in the indirect Messianic view, the singular noun prophet is viewed in terms of a chain of prophets, but that chain of prophets ultimately culminates in Messiah being the ultimate prophet of the chain of prophets. Almost like all the other prophets are coming attractions, and Messiah is the full deal. You've just entered into the movie. And that's the indirect. The direct view, and there really isn't any transfer there. So we're just going to go ahead and fix that right now, because there's no transfer in the direct view. In the direct view, the prophet is singular and it only refers to an individual. In other words, Deuteronomy 18:15 is about Messiah. And that's who it's about. There may be a chain of prophets inferred in this, but its real application is to Messiah. Now, a lot of people would take the indirect view, and I don't find that to be heretical. But are there reasons to believe that maybe what's really being talked about is Messiah, and the chain is just the way to kind of get there? The chain of prophets after Moses is vehicle, but the fulfillment of the prophecy finds its reality in Messiah alone. The immediate context. Let's talk about the immediate context. What does it tell us? Jim Sibley, again, in the handbook, he wrote the chapter on Deuteronomy 18:15 through 20, roughly. 15 through 20. I shouldn't use the term roughly. That would be considered redundant and unnecessary language. Ends up talking about the immediate context. He gives an outline. Now, the outline isn't inspired, but I really like it because it encapsulates the context so nicely. Okay, you start with a prohibition against divination in 9 through 14. 15 through 19 is the prophecy of the prophet like Moses, because we don't want to take away from his view at all. He didn't put prophets. He's going to present the direct view. In the indirect view, you might say the prophecy of prophets like Moses ending in Messiah. But in the direct view, we're going to see a difference. A warning against false prophets is given through 20 through 22. So Sarah's with her cup of coffee, and she's saying, well, where does this bring us? We've just gotten this outline. It's a really nice outline that some gentleman did, but does it tell us anything about whether the direct view or the indirect view should be accepted? The first view would lead to the conclusion that we're not talking about Messiah as an individual, but rather as a line of prophets. That's the indirect view, that really Messiah is culminating. And the non-Messianic view would share that, except it doesn't culminate in Messiah. So in the first view, you have a line of successive, we don't have Messiah as an individual. We have a line of successive prophets, but it still refers to Messiah in the end. And when you look at that line of successive prophets, then the question becomes, well, I thought this prophecy was about Messiah. You said it's about Messiah. Now you're talking about this line of prophets, saying it kind of culminates in Messiah, but where do we go here? Is it just about Messiah? I thought we were talking about Messiah. Is this really just about Messiah? And so now we talk about, some sound arguments against treating this as collective. Is there a reason why we should believe that this prophecy is fulfilled only by Messiah? And the feature of a chain of prophets is what gets us from Moses to Messiah. Now, the idea that there's a chain culminating in Messiah is not really heretical. The non-Messianic view is a real problem. But you could probably believe that there's a chain of prophets and Messiah is the ultimate prophet. And you wouldn't be wrong. But what's the prophecy really about? And so let's look at some reasons for considering, this not a collective use of a singular Hebrew noun. Okay. Michael Radelnik chimes in and he says it's perfectly consistent with an individual prophet, i.e., and this is seen in two ways. And you could type that like that, or you could stick to non-numerically. And you could say that the first particle is part of the reason here. why this is true. And, Dragon Speak would say you could do it either way, but for the sake of, good English practice here, we'll just go ahead and, stick the ordinal spelled out word, the particle that's used in the Hebrew. Now, when you do a Hebrew particle, those vowel markings get fun. Ach, but is adversive, but it falls short of antithesis. It's contrastive, but it's not this and then the opposite of this. So how do we understand this? Well, it best could be understood as however. And so what Michael Rydelnik says is a close examination of the text demonstrates what's being contrasted is the prophet like Moses with the false prophets, not Moses with the prophet who's like him. And since we're contrasting false prophets with a true prophet that's like Moses, then it makes sense to consider this singularly as referring to an individual. Now, there's another important argument here. Even though Hebrew singular nouns can be thought of in terms of being a single individual or used collectively, okay, and I just really want to kind of make this bigger for you. There we go. And move this over because I think this is really, really worthwhile because this plays into so many things. Okay. When a collective is intended, it is usual to use both singular and plural forms. Of course, the forms would be oral, they're by your mouth, but plural forms, and so this ended up being a problem here. Thank you. I don't know why that did that. Okay, but it's usual to use a singular noun, both plural forms. In other words, when collective, what you see are singular forms and plural forms. You don't just have singular forms if you have a collective. So there is a way to tell. And it's not just kind of a guessing sort of thing. You might have a singular noun with plural pronouns. Okay. And no real suffixes. Okay. The use of the singular office with the singular pronoun like me demonstrates that an individual is intended. And so, again, you'd expect some differences if you're intended that. No real suffixes. So what he's saying here, okay, is the fact that like me, saying a prophet like me, indicates a single individual, not necessarily a collective use. Not a collective use. And so that's a really, really strong argument to use that indicates that really this prophecy is really about Messiah. And he's quoting Kim, prophet like Moses, in his work. And so when we say like you, like Moses, what are we talking about here? Now, this is terribly important because Mohammedans or Muslims will say, well, this prophecy is about Muhammad. So if you didn't like the rest of this video, please hang out. This prophecy is about Muhammad. Your brethren refers to the Jews' brethren, which are the Ishmaelites. How is Messiah like, how is Jesus like Moses? How is Messiah like Moses? That's a really good question for Sarah to ask. So let's spend a little time here, okay? And pull this up so you can see it better. Not that, of course. But there are some features related to this that should help us. So let me just give you those features by pulling this over a little more. There we go. That's a little better for you to be able to see, and I want you to be able to see that. Moses upheld the inspiration of the scriptures. So did Jesus. Jesus never said the Bible was corrupted. He gives new revelation, but he doesn't say the Bible was corrupted and the old revelation's no good. Okay? Moses ministered to the children of Israel. Jesus ministered to the children of Israel. Now I'm going to show you these things from Scripture. Moses interceded for the children of Israel. Jesus interceded for the children of Israel. Moses warned the children of Israel of the judgment which was coming. Jesus warned the children of Israel of the judgment which was coming. Jesus revealed God's instruction to Israel. Moses revealed God's instruction to Israel. Well, your average Muslim would say, well, no, prove that. Okay, so let me go ahead and prove that for you. These are verses you may be familiar with. Okay, but let's just go ahead and look at these verses. And just so you can see the whole verse. Okay, because I want to make sure you see the whole verse clearly. Okay. The Lord your God, Deuteronomy 30:9 through 19, will make you abound in the work of your hand, in the fruit of your body, and in the increase of your livestock, and in the produce of the land for good. For the Lord your God will rejoice over you for good, as he rejoiced over your fathers, if you obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and statutes, which are written in the book of the law. So Moses is upholding the revelation of God, which is in existence. Remember, we're in Deuteronomy, so yes, I know that there's a little more information, but we're Deuteronomy 30 here. We're at the end of Moses' life, and he's looking at the revelation of God, and he's upholding it as being inspired. He upheld its authority. If you turn to God with all your heart and with all your soul. Now, Jesus said much the same thing, Matthew 5:17 and 18, do not think I've come to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass away from the law until all is fulfilled. Now, I don't think that means all the forms of the law for Israel are incumbent on the church. That's not the point I think he's making. First of all, the church isn't in existence yet. Okay, it's a new entity. Check out Acts chapter 2. But there are other reasons beyond that to understand this. What I do see Jesus doing is upholding the inspiration and authority of the law, that the law came from God and it was authoritative. What is going to apply to the believers has to do with the new covenant and how the old covenant and new covenant touch and fit together, and what that all means. Now that's debated, but let's just say Jesus is very clear that he believes in the authority of the law. What about ministering to the children of Israel? Now, Moses is clear, come now therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Moses' job was to minister to the children of Israel and to see God's promises of them going back to the land that God gave become fulfilled. Now, I want you to see this with Jesus. Behold, a woman from Canaan came to the region and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. And he answered, now this is a Canaanite woman, a woman from Phoenicia. He answered her, okay, and what does he say? I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, some Muslims will point to this as a contradiction. Wait a minute, now you have the Great Commission. Understand that Jesus' first mission was to Israel. Upon their rejection, God goes directly to the nations, not through Israel. There's a lot of great material in here to understand the order of operations and how it fits together, but Jesus ministered to Israel. Now let's take these two first ones and let's compare them with Muhammad. Muhammad said the scriptures were corrupted. Okay, on some level, he believed. Now, there are contradictory statements in the Quran that the Bible was given by Allah and it's guarded by Allah and it cannot be changed or corrupted. But there are other statements that indicate that there was some sort of belief that the scriptures that existed in Muhammad's day had been changed in some way. Now, Pastor Green, who's regularly on M2M Network, talks about what he thinks is the background of this passage and what Muhammad was trying to say in view of the background. I'm not going to go there. Here's the difference. Muhammad didn't uphold the authority of the scriptures. But Moses did, and the prophet like Moses would have to do likewise. Muhammad doesn't qualify, Jesus does. What about ministering to Israel? Muhammad never ministered to Israel. If you're going to be a prophet like Moses, you have to minister to the people that Moses was sent to. Jesus did minister to Israel. What about interceding? Okay. Moses, after the golden calf, definitely intercedes. Okay. It came to pass the next day, Moses said, you have committed a great sin. Now I will go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. In other words, placate God's anger. We're not talking about individual forgiveness of sin. We're talking about an expiation. We've talked about this sort of thing in terms of other verses. To allow God's righteous sentence on that individual sin that they committed corporately to be covered over. Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, oh, these people have committed a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of your book, which you have written. He's referring to take my life. If you're not going to forgive these people, just end it now. Now look at Jesus' lament in Matthew 23, 37 and 38. We're going to be getting there soon in the Matthew study. If you're not tuning into the Matthew study, I'd encourage you to. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those sent to her. How long I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. This is a lament, and Jesus is weeping over Jerusalem. Every time they show this in any movie about Jesus, he should literally have tears flowing down his cheeks. This is a lament. Okay? Warning of judgment. This is the end of Deuteronomy. What does Moses say? If your heart turns away so that you do not hear and are drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I announce to you this day that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land, nor shall you cross over the Jordan to go in and possess. Okay? Impending judgment. You do this, and there's more. Moses literally tells the children of Israel that after he dies, the children of Israel will disobey God. Okay, now look at Luke 19:41 through 44. Now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, especially in this your day, the things which made for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For your days shall come upon you when your enemies shall build an embankment around you and surround you and chase you on every side and level you and your children within you to the ground and they shall not leave one stone on another, because you did not know the day of your visitation. Jesus is warning them of judgment to come, just as Moses did. Now, here we might say that Muhammad did do some warning, but he did not minister to Israel. He did not uphold the revelation of God, and he didn't particularly warn Israel of a specific judgment in any way, whether it be a judgment of disobedience after his death, or a judgment. The judgment was general for everyone who wasn't a Muslim, not against Israel for a particular judgment that was coming because of some disobedience that was going to happen or was going on. Moses gave new information to the children of Israel. He instructed them, remember the law of Moses your servant, which I commanded him in Mount Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. By the way, that's one of the reasons I don't believe the law is for the church. Okay? Just one. The law was given for all Israel. The church isn't Israel. Therefore, the law wasn't given for the church directly. It has value. It has instruction. It's consistent with the character of God. It does get restated in the New Covenant. Parts of it do. But the law of Moses as a whole was a constitution for Israel. Now, Moses gave new instruction. They didn't have the Torah before Moses. Luke 22:19. And he took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. There was no communion before Jesus came on the scene. Israel didn't have communion. Israel still doesn't have communion. Israel doesn't have the bread and cup. He gave new instructions. This is ordinance. Do this in remembrance of me. It's a divine command. By the way, I'm really kind of big on this. You can't do communion via COVID forever. The church has to get together because there are functions of the church that need to be done together. And communion, which is commanded for the church, is one of them. So let's talk about the takeaway. I know this is running a little short, and I often, we'll talk to you guys when I'm doing a broadcast and put your comments up. But that's just not going to work right now. The takeaway truth is that Jesus is the greater Moses. That's what you need to take away. And by the way, that's everything to me. The chapter 2 of the book of Hebrews is all about this and touches on it. Whose authority is supreme? Moses' authority is under Jesus' authority. Remember that Hebrews chapter 2 says that Moses was faithful as a servant in the house, but Jesus is the son of the house. And so the takeaway truth is that Jesus is the greater Moses. Well, I can't take comments. I hope this worked out okay. This is basically what I'm doing to upload here, and I think I'm going to upload a message for the other. But it's good still trying to be with you. There'll be little attempts to put snippets up so that you can see them. But that's where we are at. God bless, and I'll see you in reality live on the other side. By the way, if you are watching this via YouTube and you have questions and stuff, when I come on again, I will be glad to take questions on the stuff that I did while I was COVID constrained, shall we say. God bless.